Hey YouTube, I got a little bit of different topic to cover today because of Trump's recent trip to the UAE and Qatar. Because of that, it also seemed that he neglected or turned his back on Netanyahu a little bit and is now distancing himself in a way that looks like Israel's getting isolated. And, you know, when we read Bible prophecy, Israel stands alone in the end. So I wanted to share a little article that I saw today. It says Saudi Arabia and France to impose Palestinian state without Israeli input. A June UN-backed conference will establish binding timeline, 7 years, for Palestinian state with sanctions for non-compliance, while disregarding Israel's security concerns and not requiring Palestinian recognition of Israel. I posted this to my Facebook, and I said basically that parting the land is what starts the road to Armageddon. Joel 3:2 says, Joel 3:2 says, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat and will plead with them there for my people and my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. You know, and you look into Daniel 9's, prophecy timeline, parting the land is a big problem and God ain't having it. He's not cool with it. So, you know, they're making big moves lately, and it causes me to wonder, as I often do, is this thing about to happen?
But here's the big picture. I think what Trump is signaling is that this is part of what he sees as the realignment, sort of the new world order, to use an overused term, that he's telling people that his relationship, our relationship as a country, is going to be closer with the Gulf states going forward than it has been ever before. And that probably comes at the price of our relationship with, say, continental Europe, that the future is in Dubai, the future is in Riyadh, the future is in Doha, the future is not in Frankfurt or in Paris.
Look, in his speech this week, Trump insisted that he is a peacemaker and a unifier. He's talking up this potential nuclear deal with Iran. Do you believe he can be the person to finally bring some peace to the region?
I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. That's what I really want to do.
President Trump revealing the part that faith plays in his governing style, both during that trip to the Middle East this week and informing his America First policy more broadly. Very interesting.
But now Trump's personal fortune has grown by over $3 billion since taking office, much of it thanks to Gulf states. Just 6 months after leaving office after Trump's first term, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, his brand new, no experience private equity firm, Affinity Partners, got a $2 billion investment from the Saudi Public Investment Fund, whose board thought that it was a really bad idea, but the fund is controlled by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's buddies with Kushner. The New York Times reported that analyses deemed Kushner's firm unsatisfactory in all aspects. Unsatisfactory in all aspects. $2 billion. Which is a sign that perhaps this wasn't about business. It was about buying access.
Also notable this week was where Trump didn't go, Israel. The Trump administration's now engaging more directly with one-time adversaries.
This accord will enable us to continue to stand by the Palestinian people and realize their hopes for an independent state within a stable and prosperous region. This accord builds upon previous peace agreements signed by Arab nations with the State of Israel. The aim of all these treaties is to work towards stability and sustainable development.
So those historic remarks at the Abraham Accords signing ceremony at the White House, September 2020.
Is this beautiful?
As Trump toured the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, one of the largest in the world, he removed his shoes as is customary. To facilitate his visit, The mosque was closed to the public for the first time ever in its history. But Trump hopes to make history with the deals he brings back to the United States.
A big day here today with the president's visit. What does it mean for this country, for the region, and where you see things?
It's definitely a historical day for us, for our relationship. The President Trump and America has been so great to the UAE in supporting this relationship, taking it even further ahead. We are a very welcoming nation like yours. People are free to do whatever they like and practice religion the way they see appropriate. Churches, mosques, synagogues, Hindu temples, you name it.
What this trip has done, which is so important, is that it has underscored every single day the fact that the Gulf states want a very different world, one marked by regional stability and economic prosperity. So in a way, Trump has really boxed in the Iranians even more on their own turf, in their own region, by cutting deals that Iran could only dream of. Iran will be surrounded by neighbors that are AI superpowers.
That's right.
The best AI activity in terms of infrastructure in the world will now be in the Middle East with U.S. companies and U.S. government involvement. The Iranians must be thinking, is enriching uranium really worth all of it?
We're looking at Gaza, and we got to get that taken care of. A lot of people are starving. A lot of people there's a lot of bad things going on.
Still, one of the biggest surprises this week was the shift in U.S. policy on Syria. After a decade of isolation, Trump not only dropped U.S. sanctions on Syria, but he also met with the country's new president. It's a geopolitical shakeup as the U.S. president explores his own brand of economic diplomacy.
Let me pick up, if I can, on something that you noted, and that is President Trump's familiarity and his affinity for these Gulf leaders, for monarchs, because the Wall Street Journal has a piece about just that and contrasting it with his at times strained relationships with traditional U.S. allies, namely European allies. The headline of this piece is he calls them handsome, attractive, tough. Trump's romance with Arab leaders, and it lists some of the praise that he's thrown at Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I like you too much. To the Syrian president, he described as attractive and tough. And to Mohammed bin Zayed, the president of the UAE, he said, "You're a magnificent man." And that really reminded me of the conversation that Steve Witkoff had with Tucker Carlson a few weeks ago, where he basically suggested that the Gulf was the future of investment, AI, all that we're seeing now, all these deals taking place, whereas he described Europe as dysfunctional and dying. What does this signal to you about the president's view on the world and his foreign policy priorities?
Well, part of it is that Trump is a businessman and he loves the idea of these very, very rich countries, but really very, very rich families. These are, essentially families that own the countries. He said at the Gulf, essentially, my foreign policy doctrine is I don't believe in interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. And he's saying this to a bunch of absolute monarchies who are loving hearing that. Of course, he does constantly intervene in the internal affairs of countries. He's constantly telling the British how they should be handling free speech issues. The Vice President Vance is telling the Germans that they should be recognizing the AfD and incorporating it in coalitions. He's telling the Canadians what to do. So actually, Trump believes in lots of interference, almost all in democracies, and in non-interference in autocracies.
Our correspondent Zaina Khudr is following the summit from Baghdad, and that urgency in the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's address, it's something that we have heard from most of the leaders so far, Zaina, as the situation in Gaza only deteriorates.
Yes, this year's annual League summit coinciding with Israel launching a new major military offensive on Gaza, a war that has been really raging for more than a year. Just yesterday, 24 hours before the summit was held, Trump reiterated this proposal. So there's really a lot of concern about the fate of the Palestinian people. There's also another message, and it's that in previous summits there was a lot of normalization of relations, a very divisive issue in this region was on the table. Now it is off the table. Arab leaders are hoping to use this as some sort of leverage, that there will be no further normalizing of ties with Israel unless Israel is committed to Palestinian statehood. But the reality is Israel is committed to continuing this war. It has said so in so many words. Its actions also, speak for themselves. This military intensification of the conflict. Now, Arab leaders, yes, many will argue that they do have, ways that they could use leverage over Israel and that it requires political will. But the bottom line is this. Many of them hoped that during the U.S. president's visit to the region this week, that some sort of a ceasefire would have been reached. It did not happen. And many will argue, unless you have the U.S. administration on board to end this war, allow aid to get in and improve, the desperate situation of Palestinians inside Gaza, nothing will change.